In all the excitement that accompanied the coming of the railway to Helmsdale, one aspect was largely overlooked. The local papers devoted many column inches to the opening of the line, but only one, the Northern Ensign, mentioned that the station house at Helmsdale occupies a unique place in construction history. It was built of what was at the time a new material, using a system quite new to building technology. It was the first railway station to be built of mass concrete. This photograph dates from slightly later, but the opening ceremony took place on the 16th of May 1871, and here's what the Northern Ensign said, and my thanks to James Naughty for reading this and the other press cuttings.
This has been quite a red-letter day here, and though the weather has been exceedingly disagreeable, a cold northerly wind blowing down the strath, accompanied by occasional snow showers, there has been a great turnout from all parts of the district. Flags floated from various prominent positions. There was a general holiday, and by an early hour in the morning, considerable numbers hied to the station. The first public demonstration was made by the scholars of the established and free church schools, who marched in procession through the village, and on arriving at the station were posted along the west side of the line opposite the station house, a neat and substantial concrete building. The arrival of the Duke and his party took place shortly before 1 o'clock, when the engine Dunrobin steamed into the station, with a long train of carriages from Golspie and intermediate stations, amid prolonged cheers from the large crowd that had assembled at and near the station.
A neat and substantial concrete building. That's a good description of the station house that still stands today. The driving force behind the use of concrete on the Sutherland estate was undoubtedly the third Duke himself, and I hope to show why the Duke embraced this new technology and how the station fits in with other concrete buildings of the time. Of course, concrete has been around since time immemorial. What was new in mid-Victorian Britain was the invention of Portland cement, and this is a cement factory at Gateshead in 1850. Concrete made with Portland cement sets much faster and harder than that made with lime or Roman cement, and that gave rise to new ways of building with it. Several people patented systems for casting entire buildings in concrete, and foremost among them was my great-grandfather, Charles Drake, who in 1868 patented this apparatus. It consists of a trough made of iron, which rises with the building, an early version of what we now call slip-form casting. The concrete is mixed below, hauled up on a pulley, and poured into the formwork. It sets overnight, and the next day the shuttering is moved up and another layer is added. Using this apparatus, it was possible to raise the walls of a house inside of a week. Suddenly, building in concrete became an economic alternative to traditional brick and stone, and for the next 10 years there will be something of a craze for using this construction method. Each of the pins on this map represents a Drake building which my wife and I have been able to find out something about, and there must be many more. They range from simple agricultural cottages, like these here in Wiltshire, to grand stately homes. This is Down Hall in Essex, and somewhere in between is the station house at Helmsdale. This is the front page of Drake's prospectus of 1871, and we can see that he mentions prominently the work he was doing for the Duke of Sutherland, a new wing to a house, and cottages at Dunrobin. And the following year, the Duke's enthusiasm for concrete was noted by the Press and Journal in Aberdeen, where Drake had appointed 2 local builders as his agents.
Referring to advertisements of Drake's patent in our columns, we see that the introduction of this comparatively new mode of building in the north is attracting considerable attention. We believe the Duke of Sutherland has secured a royalty licence from the Concrete Building Company for use of their improved concrete builder on his territory, where various houses have been erected with it during the bypast 3 years.
The Sutherland estate account books record that their first purchase of Drake's apparatus was indeed as early as September 1869. The first building to be constructed with it was not actually at Dunrobin. It was a new wing to the inn on the banks of Loch Shin at Overskeig. We have a good account of its construction from the letters of the estate architect William Fowler and of the Dunrobin factor Joseph Peacock. Here's Fowler writing to the Duke on the 11th of September 1869. My Lord Duke, Mr. Peacock told me today that your Grace wishes to know when the cement and concrete apparatus is to be sent up to Overskeig. Part of the cement is already at Lairg, and I expect the rest will be sent up on Monday, and on Tuesday morning will be on board the steamer to go to Overskeig. The steamer, whose Gaelic name translates delightfully as the Midge, was mainly used to carry lime from Shinnes to Lairg, and we see it here in a detail from a larger picture at Dunrobin Castle. A full set of Drake's apparatus weighed in at over 2 tons, so putting it on the steamer rather than hauling it by road made good sense. What this letter shows is that the Duke was taking a keen interest in this project. The apparatus was said to be fully at work by late November. The earliest photograph we have of the inn is dated August 1914. The new wing is the building in the background. And here it is today. The 3-storey building is the 1869 wing. The contractor for the work was one of the Dunrobin craftsmen, a slater by the name of John Sutherland. The other building mentioned in Drake's prospectus is a cottage at Dunrobin. It formed part of Dunrobin Mains, the home farm of the castle. Shirley Sutherland of the Golspie Heritage Society tells me that it stood here. Building started in November 1869, but soon ran into difficulties. William Fowler to George Loch, the Sutherland Estate Commissioner, 23rd of November 1869. The weather has been so stormy as to prevent all further progress with the work at the cottage. I'm afraid we must let this stand over till spring. It's clear, though, that like Overskeig, this was a project dear to the Duke's heart. On January the 27th, William Fowler writes to Joseph Peacock, "While in Edinburgh, I received a letter from Mr. Knight in which he said the Duke wishes to know whether anything further has been done at this cottage, and whether the frost has had any effect on the portions already done. I wrote to Mr. Knight that nothing further had been done, and that I would write again on my return. For his Grace's information, I have today seen the portion of the building already erected, and I do not think the frost has had much effect." 1869-70 was a particularly harsh winter. Fowler writes to George Loch again in March, saying that they have had to replace some of the work which had been damaged by frost. He says, "I have no recollection of such a long winter and such intense frost as we have had this season." By mid-April, things had got a little better. William Fowler to George Loch, April the 18th. The concrete cottage at Dunrobin Mains has had the roof put on and is being slated. And now we get the first indication that William Fowler did not entirely share the Duke's enthusiasm for this new material. It has been a most tedious piece of work, and we have learned that we cannot build concrete walls new in winter. It cannot be done in frosty weather, nor in very wet weather. Well, the cottage was eventually finished, and it stood until a couple of years ago when it was demolished. By that time it was derelict. But we do have a photograph of it, and our thanks go to John Mackay, also of the Golspie Heritage Society, for taking it. When my wife and I visited the site a few weeks ago, we found this corbel, which someone has thoughtfully saved. It is all that is left of the cottage at Dunrobin. And now we come to Helmsdale Station. We know that Helmsdale is very similar to Golspie Station. They are built pretty much to the same design by William Fowler, but of a different material. Helmsdale is of course concrete, and Golspie is constructed in traditional stone. I looked out the building specifications for the two stations. The Golspie specs date from 1867, and those for Helmsdale are dated 30th of June 1870. I was surprised to discover that these two documents are also pretty much identical. There is no mention of the use of concrete at Helmsdale. It too was to be built of stone. The whole of the interior and exterior walls to be of the best rouble stone, it reads, and I think that's a kind of dressed sandstone. Now, construction at Helmsdale was due to begin in mid-August, a mere 6 weeks after this specification was drawn up. William Fowler writes to Joseph Peacock on the 15th of August, saying that a quantity of gravel had been laid and the cement was on the way, and that a contractor, once again the estate builder John Sutherland, had been appointed for the concrete work. So, sometime between June the 30th and August the 15th, 1870, the specification for Helmsdale changed from stone to concrete. How could this have come about? Not, I suspect, at William Fowler's behest. This must have been an edict from the Duke. And it seems to have caused quite a stir. For one thing, where was all the concrete building apparatus? William Fowler to Mr. Alexander at Lairg, August the 18th. The first day the steamer goes up the loch, mind that she calls at Overskeg to bring down the remainder of the concrete apparatus. Mind that not a bit is left behind. Well, they clearly didn't find enough of it, because in the accounts for November 1870 we find an order for new concrete building apparatus from Drake's Company for £15 9 shillings and 9 and another in December for £36 10 shillings and 6. By the 16th of December, William Fowler could report to George Loch, the estate commissioner, that the upper floor is just erected and the goods shed started and the office is being fitted out. The Inverness Courier reported on the use of concrete at the station, saying that the operation has been watched with great interest. On the 17th of April 1871, Fowler writes to Loch, "The floors are laid and the partitions in office and luggage room are fitted up. The joiners are specifying fittings of the office." And then, oh joy, 23rd of June 1871, William Fowler to George Loch, "Helmsdale Station is completed." The Duke's enthusiasm for concrete does not stop at Helmsdale. There is a letter from William Fowler to the Duke, dated the 19th of April 1871, in which we learn a lot about the two men's view of the material. The Duke is clearly advocating the use of concrete in another project, a house at Loch Neva. And William Fowler, who has not been asked for his opinion, nevertheless offers one. He writes, "I am not quite sure whether your Grace wishes me to give an opinion about concrete for Loch Neva House. Concrete in this county can be said only to be experimental, and has only been in usage a short time." He suggests that there might be found risk in using it for so important a work as Loch Neva House. He reports on some water ingress at Overskeg, and says he went to Helmsdale to examine the effect of a gale with sleet from the east, and found several spots on the exposed side. He concludes, "I am still of the opinion that concrete may be useful in some parts of the county. I think, however, that it is still on trial." I don't know whether Loch Neva House was ever built, but I think it's fair to say that as far as concrete is concerned, William Fowler's verdict is a Scottish not proven. All goes quiet on the concrete front in Sutherland for 7 years. I have found no mention of it until August the 22nd, 1878, when William Fowler writes to Joseph Peacock, the Dunrobin factor, saying, "The Duke wishes the concrete apparatus to be sent to Brora. I have had it looked out and have sent notice to the station master to send for it tomorrow." Once again, the Duke is riding his hobby horse. He has a new project, and it involves concrete. Up to now, we have looked at concrete mainly through the sceptical eyes of the estate architect William Fowler. But there is a much bigger picture to be painted, and this next project helps us to see why the Duke was so enthusiastic about this new material and where it fits into his world view. The project forms part of the Duke's massive land reclamation scheme of the 1860s and 70s. As a result of the Highland clearances of the 1830s, agriculture on the 1,000,000 or so acres of the Sutherland estate now comprised a few huge sheep farms, and here they are, and many small crofts and settlements on the margins. There was very little arable land, so the sheep had to be moved to neighbouring counties to overwinter, and the Duke was persuaded that much of what was termed waste land could be made productive by drainage and fertilisation. So he set out to create a number of middle-sized sheep farms, where the tenant farmer could live and also grow winter feed on the newly reclaimed arable land. One of the areas he chose to put this plan into effect was the Strath of Kildonnan, with new farmsteads in the area around Kinbrace. Here's the farm at Kinbrace as it was in 1876, a sheep farm covering 30,000 acres, supporting 6,000 sheep. It's been divided into 3 areas, and in them are the parcels of land earmarked for improvement. In all, 5 small farms were planned, about 100 acres each, with 1,000 or so acres of outrun for the sheep to graze. In 1878, the Duke hired as his Commissioner for Reclamations a man named George Gregg. Gregg was a native of Kincardineshire, but when we come across him, he was an agent for an English company, Fowler and Sons, who were steam plough manufacturers in Leeds. In the 1881 census, Gregg describes himself as an agricultural engineer. And this is what agricultural engineering in the 1870s looked like. Across the Sutherland estate, thousands of acres were ploughed up by Fowler's steam ploughs, designed with input from the Duke himself, and he is seen here driving one of them. In all, there were 8 ploughs and 7 traction engines, all needing, as we can see here, a large workforce drawn from the crofting community. Special light rail tracks were laid to bring in the coal and water for the engines. And then, of course, there were those farmsteads that needed building. Now, although the Duke had extensive brickworks at Brora, the cost of building in brick and the lack of skilled labour made such a construction method uneconomic. The Duke had other ideas, and it becomes clear that in this matter George Gregg was on a steep learning curve. Gregg received a directive, undoubtedly from the Duke himself, to consider the use of concrete for the farm buildings, a building system with which Gregg was clearly totally unfamiliar. But for some reason, rather than consult the estate architect and factors, or look at the already completed buildings on the estate, he writes to the architectural journal The Builder, and we can perhaps sense his anxiety behind this seemingly innocent question. "Sir, I wish to get information in regard to the building of concrete houses," he writes. "The Duke of Sutherland is desirous of extending his reclamations in the centre of Sutherland, where there is a difficulty of getting skilled labour, and it has been suggested that the houses might be constructed entirely of concrete, including the floors, walls, partitions and roofs. I will feel obliged if any of your correspondents can give us any information whether or not this is practicable, or whether it would be more expensive than the ordinary method of erecting houses. There is plenty of clean sand and gravel to be got from the burns in the neighbourhood." And it's signed G.G. The following week he receives a reply from Charles Drake. And curiously, Drake makes no mention either of the existing buildings on the Sutherland estate. Maybe he just didn't know about the station at Helmsdale. Anyway, he says that there's no problem with the practicability of building in concrete in Sutherland, and he goes on to list its advantages, such as dryness, warmth, being fireproof, durable, and especially as regards the roofs, less liability to need repairs. And then he says, ample proof already exists in the north of Scotland of these advantages of concrete building. 5 or 6 years ago, my firm built walls, floors and stairs of the Aberdeen Theatre in concrete, and a present examination will show how good and valuable a material concrete is for such uses. I have also built in Aberdeen the new epidemic hospital, new slaughterhouses for the Flesher Corporation and other buildings, and mention these that G.G. or his agents may have the opportunity to satisfy themselves by personal examination. The buildings Drake mentions were attracting great attention in the press, and they may help us to understand why the Duke added this new technology to his repertoire of engineering projects, such as the railway and the land reclamation scheme. They all belong to the same progressive mindset. So let's have a look at these buildings, and I'm going to add in a couple more to give an overview of Drake's work in Scotland in the early 1870s. We go first then to Aberdeen. The theatre Drake mentions, originally called Her Majesty's Theatre, is now the Tivoli. It was designed by the London architect Charles Phipps and Aberdeen's James Matthews. The granite facade on Guild Street is about the only part of it that is not made of concrete. When I first knew it in the 1970s, it was a bingo hall, and for many years after that it was dark. But in 2012 it underwent a major restoration and is once again triumphantly part of Aberdeen's cultural life. Drake's work is most clearly visible on the rear wall. It is, I believe, the first theatre to be built of mass concrete, and that makes it substantially fireproof. At this time, theatres burnt down with depressing regularity, so it represents a step change in public safety. It was also built incredibly quickly. Construction started in May 1872, and it opened its doors on the 19th of December the same year. This is a view taken in 1900 of the Epidemic Hospital on Urquhart Road. The wings on the left and right housing the wards were built of concrete, with granite again being used for the centre section. The hospital had its first test in a smallpox epidemic in 1878, and it was still serving this vital function as late as the typhoid outbreak of 1964. The concrete walls and floors, though rather cold and cheerless, had the advantage that they were easy to keep clean and germ-free. Drake's slaughterhouse was on Wales Street, and the last vestiges of it, which we can see here, were cleared away in 1959 to make way for the Beach Boulevard. It replaced some positively medieval slaughtering facilities, so again the new building marked a step forward in hygiene, since the interior, including the walls and floors, could be cleansed simply by hosing them down. So we find Aberdeen in the 1870s at the forefront of a revolution in building technology and in public health and safety. This advance would not have been lost on the Duke of Sutherland. He led the way by being among the first in the northeast of Scotland to adopt the use of concrete and its associated building system. It's possible that it was in Aberdeen also that the Duke first heard of Charles Drake. Drake marketed his ideas to the big landowners and their estate managers by booking prime space at agricultural shows. We have a good account of one of these, the Royal Highland Show, which then as now attracted huge crowds. This is a picture of it in Aberdeen, and here's how the Press and Journal reported it when it visited Kelso in 1872.
Conspicuous in the centre of the yard was a specimen of Drake's patent concrete building, in the shape of a half-built cottage with all the patent iron apparatus. This style of building, as it becomes better known, will be taken greater advantage of than it has hitherto been. Handsome buildings can be put up in an incredibly short time, as the progress with our new theatre strikingly attests. We have seen the new hydropathic establishment at Melrose, built by the same firm, and a handsomer building of the kind is not to be seen anywhere.
That new hydropathic establishment might also have been familiar to the Duke. It's also known as the Waverley Hydro, a massive concrete building designed by the architect James Campbell Walker. Drake put a picture of it, done before it was even completed, on the title page of his prospectus. It opened in 1871, the same year as Helmsdale Station, and shortly afterwards it was doubled in size. This photograph by George Washington Wilson shows it in 1877, and it still stands today. Nothing like this had ever been attempted before, and it was the topic of intense interest in Scotland and indeed around the world. This is how the Kelso Chronicle reported it.
The walls of the castle, as we may call it, are of concrete, a new material which bids fair to rival the properties of cement with which the Romans built their everlasting walls. It is impermeable to damp, it does not absorb animal effluvia, and it is so strong that even a charge of gunpowder is powerless to blast a block of the material.
We perhaps rather take concrete for granted today, but in mid-Victorian Britain it was a revolutionary new material, and it won praise not just from progressive developers, but also from the workers who lived in houses built of it, which Drake termed good and cheap dwellings for the poor. I'm going to conclude this quick tour of early concrete in Scotland with a visit to Hawick. At this time, Hawick was undergoing massive expansion with the rise of the woolen mills, and the town's population more than doubled. The mill workers' living conditions in the 1860s were simply appalling. In 1874, Drake's company was brought in to improve things, and this is one of his new buildings. We get a good idea from the Southern Reporter of how well his work was received.
The concrete system of housing introduced at Queensland last summer and looked on as utopian has established itself in public favour. A long range of workmen's houses and a large wool store have been constructed of that material. By the same process, an extensive warehouse is being put up in Bridge Street. A concrete manse has recently been finished, and the Hawick Working Men's Building Society have contracted with Messrs Drake for the erection of a block of concrete houses capable of accommodating 20 families.
I think that must be the first use of the word utopian in connection with concrete. And it meant that, possibly for the first time in their lives, workers' families could live in a clean, dry house that was free from vermin and easy to keep warm. So, armed with all that knowledge about concrete, let's return to the Strath of Kildonan, where the Duke was taking a particular interest in land reclamation. This enterprise brings together all the Duke's technological enthusiasms: the railway, the steam ploughs, and now the concrete farmsteads, built with innovative new technology. And there's a useful byproduct. The stones hoiked out of the soil will make excellent raw material for the new concrete buildings. To the Duke's Titanic steam ploughs, as one newspaper called them, we can add 2 more steam-driven machines, both patented by Charles Drake, which turn this byproduct into aggregate and then concrete. There's a stone crusher, and this, or one very like it, was used on the estate to break up the boulders. And a concrete mixer, which would undoubtedly have been needed on the Kinbrace site. The Northern Ensign recorded in 1879 that at Kinbrace, Mr. Gregg, the energetic manager, is at present erecting 4 very fine houses, although in fact only 3 were built. The best example is at Lochside on the Achentowle estate, and the next best is at Harveston on the road to Badenoch. The third, at Bannockburn, was started but never completed. They were all built to a standard plan. The house forms one side of the square, and the whole farmstead is a bit like a large concrete box with internal divisions. Lochside is immediately recognisable from the drawings, but Harveston has been considerably altered. The original roof blew off in a gale, and the house was replaced 20 years ago by a barn, which we can see behind the main building. James MacDonald, an agricultural journalist from Aberdeen, visited these 2 farms in 1880, and here's part of his report.
About 40 acres have already been reclaimed on each of these small farms, and on the first 2, handsome steadings and dwelling houses have just been erected. These buildings are of novel construction, being almost entirely formed of concrete. The office houses are covered with one large span of corrugated iron, supported by girders of worn-out rails, which are obtained cheaply at the railway station, and which suit the purpose admirably. With the exception of this roof, however, and the doors and windows, the whole construction is formed of concrete. Walls, floors, stairs, roofs, and even the floors of the attics and granaries, which have no support, other than the concrete.
James MacDonald tells us that the cost of each of the farms, consisting of a 6-room house, a byre and stable with granary above, connected to the house by a covered yard, was £450. We can contrast that with the £2,000 for similar farm buildings constructed of stone at Shinnes. A short distance from Lochside, on the road to Forcenard, we can see all there ever was of the third farm at Bannockburn. Because it was never completed, it's never been altered, so we can learn quite a lot from it. On this side, it has not received the finishing coat of cement render that was applied to all Drake's buildings, and it's possible to see the lines of the shuttering in the walls at 2-foot intervals. We can see these in the station at Helmsdale too. The aggregate is uneven in size, clearly made of the local stone which has been put through the stone crusher. On the other side, the walls have been rendered, and the byres and their concrete roof are still in place. Why was it not completed? The land reclamation project was abandoned in 1880. It had been, quite simply, a failure in every sense of the word. Not my judgment, but that of the Napier Commission, set up in 1883 to examine the grievances of Highland crofters. The project had expended vast amounts of money, over £200,000 in total, and the Duke is said to have never got a farthing of rent for the whole thing. These, then, are the concrete buildings from the 1870s on the Sutherland estate. We have, in chronological order, the new wing to the inn at Overscaig, the cottage at Dunrobin Mains, the station at Helmsdale, and the farms in the Strath of Kildonan. There are several reasons why we don't find more buildings like them. One could be that, as William Fowler feared, the climate was just too harsh. There were also reports at the time that some of the buildings suffered from condensation inside, and the week after Drake's letter, the builder printed another response to George Gregg's inquiry from a certain JSS. He says that he knows Sutherlandshire well, and suggests that concrete walls would not keep out the driving rain and would need further cladding, inside and outside, a claim which Charles Drake vigorously denied. And what of Charles Drake's dream of a new concretopia? Sadly, it was an idea that was simply too far ahead of its time. In 1874, Drake made an impassioned and prophetic speech calling for a new style of architecture, and he urged architects to find the right architectural treatment of concrete buildings. But the architectural establishment turned against him. What we got instead was the arts and crafts movement, which comprehensively rejected system building, preferring instead skills and materials that harked back to the age of medieval craftsmen. Drake died in 1892, the same year as the third Duke, and his dream was put on hold until the modernist movement of the early 20th century. I'm going to end with one more building. Drake's reply to George Gregg in The Builder contains references to several buildings that we would otherwise not have known of or not been able to attribute to him, and this is one of those. In what appears almost as an aside, he refers to the domed concrete roof of the Arlington Street swimming baths, Glasgow. It is, he says, the best of the concrete roofs I have executed in Scotland. It is one of the most daring and innovative of all Drake's buildings, and it gives us a glimpse of what could have been if architects had only responded to Drake's call for a new style of architecture for building in concrete. It can't be seen from the street. I took this photograph in someone's back garden. But inside it is quite astonishing. Built in 1875, this is the Turkish room. The ceiling soars above your head to a height of perhaps 30 feet or more. It is heated by ducting cast into the walls to around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so even on the snowiest day, which is when we visited, it is as hot as a sauna. So, Next time you find yourself on Helmsdale station and the weather is as it was on that opening day, with a cold northerly wind blowing down the strath, accompanied by occasional snow showers, I invite you to think of the Turkish room, built at the same time, of the same material, and with the same apparatus, and I hope it may make you feel a little warmer. And that seems as good a place as any to draw to a close. Thank you very much.